Hey boys and girls, welcome to another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. Today I'm going to be covering part 17 of the oak kitchen tabletop guitar build. And believe it or not, I think it's done. The last step is to do the final setup. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. The first thing I have to do is tune the strings, and I'll be tuning to standard tuning, so E, A, D, G, B, E. And I'm just using an app on my iPhone. It's called Pano Tuner. And it seems to work pretty well. I've tested it against more accurate tuners and it seems to be dead on. So that should work just fine. But what I'm going to do now is I'll tune it. And that's just the initial string tuning. As you can see, I'm doing this acoustically. I don't have it plugged into the amp. Doesn't need to be. Next, now that the strings are tuned, I'm going to check to make sure that the neck is dead flat level. When I do my setup work, part of what I'm going to be doing is checking for fret buzz, and I like to do that with the neck absolutely level. That way it's easier to isolate and locate frets that are causing issues, if there are any, and then I can address those. And then later on, if I want to, I can add a little bit of a bow in the neck, because some guys like to have a little bit of bow. They call it neck relief. I'm not sure why, but what I'm going to do is use my slotted ruler here, and I'll set it right down on the neck so that the slots are going, the notches are over the frets. And then I'll check to see, and I've got a little bit of a gap here in the center. That means the string tension is pulling the neck into a slight bow. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the truss rod. And the truss rod I use is one of these common two-way double action truss rods. And the way it works is I use this is a 4mm hex wrench, super long one. And I'll insert that into the nut on the truss rod, which is in here. And when I turn it clockwise, the rod will bow this way. If I turn it counterclockwise, it will bow this way. So in this case, since I have a little bit of a gap here at the 9th fret between the fretboard and my string gauge, or my notched ruler, I need to turn the wrench clockwise to get rid of some of that bow. And I'll just turn it in small increments and then recheck to see if I've got that level. And it looks pretty good right now. There's no gap there, so the fretboard is level. And now what I'm going to do is recheck to make sure that the strings are still in tune, because straightening the neck will pull them out of tune. To adjust the intonation of each string, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little tuning app on my phone to check and see if there's a difference in the pitch between each string when I play the 12th fret harmonic and then when I press the string down to the 12th fret. Ideally, we want that pitch to match. And if it doesn't, I'll have to either increase the scale length of each string or decrease the scale length. So I'll start by playing the harmonic at the 12th fret. Then I'll press the string down to the 12th fret, and I press it very, very lightly. You don't want to press it down to the fretboard wood itself, because that will cause you to have an inaccurate reading. So I just lightly touch it down to the fret and then play it again. With the strings tuned and intonated, the next thing I want to do is check the action of the strings, because even though I set this before, there's a possibility that that action might have changed ever so slightly by tuning and intonating the strings. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check the action at the 12th fret using one of these string action gauges. And I just simply place it on the 12th fret and check to see where the string passes over the gauge, which can tell me what the height is. And in this case, at the 12th fret, the bottom of the low E string is about 5/64 of an inch. And then what I'll do after that is I'll check the high E string. And what I'm going for with that is about 3/64 of an inch, which is what it is right now. If the strings needed to be raised or lowered, that can be done at the bridge saddles by raising or lowering them. And once that's done, with this type of bridge, this hardtail fender style bridge, what I have to do is check the radius. So I'll use a radius gauge, and this one has a 12-inch radius. And then I would set it down so that the edge of the gauge is touching both the high and low E strings. And then I would check to see where the other strings are in relation. Are they too low? Are they pushing up on the gauge? And then I would adjust the height of each saddle until they were just right. And then, once that's done, I have to check the tuning and intonation again, a second time. Because remember, when it comes to doing setups, especially anything related to the strings, what you do on one process is going to affect the next process. So you kind of have to keep going back and forth. It's sort of like setting up a Floyd Rose bridge. As you increase string tension, it pulls up on the bridge, so then you have to adjust the springs to pull it back down. Then you have to retune the strings, which cause the bridge to pop back up. You have to tighten the springs, and you keep going back and forth until you get it dialed in just right. So the key really is just to be patient and to understand that an adjustment made here is going to affect the adjustments that were made here. But once the strings are at the right action, they've all been tuned and intonated, we're now ready to move on to check the frets for fret buzz. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play each string at each fret slowly and carefully. And as I move up the fretboard, I'm going to be listening to the telltale signs of fret buzz. And if I notice fret buzz, I will continue to move up the fretboard until that fret buzz seems to disappear. That will help me to isolate which fret is giving me some trouble. Okay, the high E string has no fret buzz, so we're good on that one. The next one is the B string. I can hear a little bit of buzz. Okay, the buzz is happening down at the around somewhere in the 1st to 5th fret. Okay, it's disappeared by the time I reach the 8th fret, so I know it's one of these frets in here. And very likely it's going to be probably, I would say, probably the 7th fret. Or actually, it might be the 8th fret. And what I can do to double check that is to grab a fret rocker and I will place it right in there to see if I can get the rocker to do its thing. And it is the 8th fret. I got a little tiny bit of rocking. So what I'll do is I will make a mental note that the B string at the 8th fret has a little bit of a high spot, and I'll need to take that down. But then I'll continue on. Now you can also just mark it with a little bit of a Sharpie if you want to. So we'll go with the G string. There's buzz. Okay, it goes away once I get up to the 9th fret. So it's definitely, there's an issue with that 8th fret, probably a high spot that spans its length. But then I'll continue up. I'm getting a little bit buzz again. Okay, it sounds like it's one of these 3 frets up here. So that looks like about the 19th fret. That's a high spot, so I got to deal with that too. So the 8th fret, the 19th fret, and I'll just continue with each string, playing at each fret, trying to isolate the position of, or the fret that has, or the frets that are causing a slight amount of buzz. And once I've isolated those, I can then direct and focus my efforts to correct that on just those frets. Now to spot level the frets, I'm going to have to remove the strings to provide access to the frets. And before I do that, I'm just going to take a second to check the height of my pickups in relation to the bottom of the strings. And the way I do that is I will press the string down to the very last fret, the 24th fret, and then I will look to see what kind of spacing I have between the bottom of the string when it's pressed to the 24th fret and the top of the pickups. Now, here's a tip. The closer the string is to the pole piece, the less sustain you have. And the reason for that is because the pole pieces are magnetized, and since the strings are metal, they become magnetized as well. So where the string is passing over the pole piece, that magnetization of both elements creates resistance to the string's vibration. And it's the length of the string's vibration that in time that is essentially sustained. So the more resistance there is, the less the string will vibrate in terms of time. It'll vibrate for a shorter period of time. So if your guitar doesn't have the best sustain, you can always check to see how close the pole piece is to the string. And if it's really too close, you can always adjust the height of the pickup and move that pole piece slightly away from the string. and that might help to improve your sustain. Of course, at the same time, if the pole piece is too far away from the string, that can affect tone and it can make the guitar sound quieter. If you recall, I leveled the fretboard by adjusting the truss rod because the neck had a slight bow to it once it was under string tension. Well, now that I've removed the string tension by loosening the strings, I need to check and see if there is bow in the opposite direction, which there is. So I need to adjust the truss rod again in order to make the fretboard perfectly level. So I have to turn my truss rod nut counterclockwise and relieve some of that bow in the center. And that pretty well takes care of it. I now have a flat fretboard. So at this stage I can accurately spot level the frets. I have identified tentatively 3 frets which have some high spots. The 4th fret, the 8th fret, and the 19th fret. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gradually lower those, spot leveling basically, using a 3-corner file. And with this file I can level it and then quickly recrown it. And what I like to do to protect the fretboard is I use this brown binding tape from StewMac. This stuff really works well. It's durable and robust, so it does a great job of protecting the fretboard while I'm doing this kind of work. Because you always want to be careful not to damage the fretboard with the file. And I also like to use one of these little fretboard protectors. But the key to this is to work gradually. And I've used my fret rocker to identify the fact that there are high spots on there. So what I'll do is I will gradually bring this down by filing just the top surface of the fret. And I want to bring it down until it's just about level with the 2 adjacent frets. And you have to be really careful here, because if you go too far, then these frets become the high frets. So this is something that takes a little bit of experience to get it right. But I'll just gradually work down the top of that fret. Now these are stainless steel frets, so they take quite a bit of elbow grease to get them level. But now what I can do is I'll just continue to check, and I'll continue to file until I get it just right in terms of being level. Still has a ways to go. This one's pretty far out. Okay, it seems to be just in this area right in here. So that's where I'll focus my effort to remove material from the top of the fret. All right, that's level. So now what I'll do is I'll recrown it. And I'll do that with the same file, just by working the edges and rounding it over. And I've demonstrated this in other videos before. In fact, I'll put a link up above if you want to see how I do this up close. So with all the leveling, spot leveling, recrowning done, I'm ready to do the final polish on all the frets. And I'm going to start here at the first fret, and I've put down my binding tape to protect the fretboard. And what I need to do is to remove the marks that were left by my 3-corner file. So I'll start with a P220 grit, and this will do most of the work to remove those sanding or those tool marks. And what it's going to do is replace those tool marks with 220 grit sanding scratches. Then I'll move on to a P400, and that's going to replace the 220 grit scratches with the P400 grit scratches. Then I'll jump to the P600, and that's going to replace the 400 grit scratches with 600 grit scratches. And then I'll hit it with P800, which will replace the 600 grit scratches with 800 grit scratches. And once that's done, I will grab a succession of different synthetic steel wool pads. These are, I believe, Norton, and I'll start with their coarsest, which is this red. And this is going to start to bring up a nice shine. Then I'll go to the green, which is a little bit finer. Then the gray, which takes it to an even finer level. And then finally the white, which is the finest. Okay, so what I need to do now is I've got to put the nut back in, and I'm going to do that with a little bit of CA glue. And then I will reinsert all the strings into the nut. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double check the flatness of the fretboard with my notch straight edge. And I've got a tiny bit of relief right in the, kind of in the 8th and the 9th fret, which I'm fine with. I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, so the next step in the setup process is to make sure that the electronics actually work the way they're supposed to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to strum the guitar. It's plugged into the amplifier, and I'll check each of the switch positions, and I'll check the volume and tone knob to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. So I've got the switch in the first position, which means it's selecting the bridge humbucker. Now I go to the second position, which is the middle single coil. Now go to the third position, which is the neck single coil. Then I go to the fourth position, which is the bridge humbucker and the middle single coil. And then I'll go to the 5th position, which is the bridge humbucker and the next single coil. And then I'll go finally to the 6th position. Now, in the 6th position, originally, I had all 3 pickups selected, but I didn't really like the way it sounded. So I rewired the 6th position so that it only selects the middle and neck pickups. And it gives it kind of that strat quack that I was hoping to achieve. And then as far as the volume knob, does what it's supposed to do. The tone knob, it has kind of an on-off characteristic to it. There's a little bit of a roll-off on it. I like to normally have it more of a gradual transition, but it basically you get really bright or really warm and a little bit in between. But overall, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And so the very last step in this whole guitar building project is the installation of the truss rod cover. This is sort of like when you christen a ship. So I've got to just position it in there, and I will have to remove some strings and get them out of the way. And then I need to drill some pilot holes. And I'm going to do that with a 16th inch drill bit, and I put a little piece of tape on there so I know how deep to drill it. And what I do is I will drill just one hole first, and I'll install the screws, which I have right here, and I'll just put one screw in. Make sure I have the truss rod cover straight before drilling the next holes. Oh, and one other thing I like to do is put some paste furniture wax onto the threads of the screws, because these screws are so tiny, they will have a tendency to break when you try to thread them into the wood, even with a pilot hole. So I'm just going to take some of this paste wax and scrape some onto the threads. See, it makes it so much easier to, there's really no effort. Then I will drill the other 2 holes, making sure the cover is straight and not cockeyed. All right, guys, well, the oak kitchen tabletop guitar build is now finished. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. You know, like a lot of folks, I always wondered, can you actually build a guitar out of oak? And I think the answer to that is absolutely. This entire guitar is oak. The body, the neck, the fretboard, even the control cavity cover is oak. And I think it made a fine guitar. As far as the weight is concerned, because I channeled out the body, the weight came in at about 7.4 pounds, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of like a Stratocaster to Les Paul type of thing. It's a little bit lighter than a Les Paul, but maybe a skosh heavier than a Stratocaster. I guess it would depend on the kind of wood that the Strat's made out of. But 7.4 pounds isn't too bad. And I really like the 6-way rotary switch with 3 pickups and all the different tonal options that it has to offer. Now, if you were hoping to hear a really good sound sample of what this guitar sounds like when it's played through an amplifier, I'm afraid you're just going to have to do without, because I don't do audio samples on YouTube. What happens with the audio when it's compressed and uploaded to YouTube, I think basically ruins the quality of the audio. And I think when you're talking about, making a judgment of a guitar or an amplifier, you have to hear it in person. And that's why when I sell my guitars, I always make sure that the customer understands they've got a 2-week period in which they can play the guitar and try it out and decide if it's offering the kind of tone that they want. And if it absolutely isn't, I'm willing to give them a refund. Or I can work with them to try to make the tone exactly what they want. So that's typically how that works. Is this guitar going to be for sale? Probably. Everything's for sale. Head over to Highline Guitars and shoot me an email and inquire. I'm thinking that this will probably be somewhere in the $900 to $1,000 range, which is lower than what I usually price my guitars, but that's because I'm using an old kitchen tabletop that I've had for 25 years. So at any rate, I hope you've enjoyed this series, and at the end of this I'll put a link to the playlist for the whole shebang in case you want to go back and watch any of the previous episodes in this build. And as always, if you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Give me that thumbs up, it always helps. If you don't subscribe, hit the subscribe button, click the bell for notifications. And if you'd like to show this channel some support and maybe give me a tip for all the work I put in on this channel, head over to eguitarplants.com, purchase a plan for either a guitar or the tools that I use to make guitars. And even if you don't build them, just know that the money you spend helps to support this channel. And until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.